Hey, let's start the show.
For Friday, September 30th, 2022. Welcome to This Is Only a Test, the official podcast of Tested.com. Hello. Welcome to the beginning of the fall season. And we are in Q4? We are in Q4. Hello, everyone. I'm Norm, and thank you for joining us for the last podcast of September. Joining me, as always, Kishore Hari.
It is spooky season soon.
Oh, my gosh.
Or, as I like to say it, smack an asteroid around season.
Oh, that's right. Whoa. Ooh, topical. Before we get to that, let me tell you, it's not October yet as we're recording this. September is just coming to a close. But I was at Costco last week, and they had Christmas trees. They had Christmas trees at Costco. Too early. Too early?
Too early.
Too early. Pumpkin spice latte? Okay, it's the fall. It's pumpkin spice season. It's autumn. Autumn's all right. But we got Halloween, Thanksgiving. Trees are not, no trees yet. Please. No trees yet. A little bit too early. But yes, as you mentioned, it is, it's, oh my gosh, it's Armageddon, right? Which ties to a story that we're going to get to at the end of the show here. But wow. Tell us about what happened.
The DART mission for NASA sent a small probe to hit an asteroid and just smacked it like right in the face, like pow, right in the kisser, just crushed it. And the whole idea behind this mission is to see if we could actually use this for asteroid deflection. And so we're still waiting on some of the results to see some of the changes in orbital pattern from that asteroid now that it's been hit. But there are all indications based off of different telemetry that it has actually changed course a little bit. There is some spectacular imagery of not just from the onboard camera, which was just amazing if you weren't watching the NASA mission, of seeing, you could really see the geology of the planet start to come to life, the kind of rocky surface right before impact. But there's also views from other telescopes that were pointing at it where you can actually see the effects of the impact. It was spectacular. And I know like it became a social media joke in a lot of ways, but it's just another one of those things where like the precision of what was happening was on full display. We talked about this years ago about, landing a minivan in a crater on Mars, millions of miles away, and they were off by like a couple hundred meters. This one, they were off by the center of their impact by 19 meters. So it's just like the amazing amount of precision that is on display from those teams. Just a huge round of applause. And it was spectacular to watch.
Yeah. Trust the math. Trust the numbers. And all, like you said, is very early in terms of studying the potential planetary defense. Rogue asteroids and just ways to potentially deflect, planet-killing asteroids in the future. Yeah.
So Bruce Willis should stay on high alert. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, I think, I apologize. Everyone has made that joke this week.
Yes. Very cool. If you haven't seen it, there's a lot of remixes of the footage of the final frames. When I saw it, the thing I was wondering, like I said, like you, very fascinated by the geology and the surface terrain, because we're never going to get imagery that close in those final frames. But I was wondering, would there be ways to use AI to do some type of reconstruction, photogrammetry style, right? Of some type of nerfing of of the asteroid just using the series of images as it got closer, as Dart got closer.
Yeah, I think we need to learn a little bit more about the lens, because the lensing effects that were there, like, we're used to taking pictures in atmosphere, which creates its own like sort of warping around it, and so it'll be interesting to see the shape of that lens. I actually don't know. If you haven't seen, there's some great imagery from Hubble, which was pointed at the collision site as well, and the JWST was as well. I mean, they're not like super intricate images, but you can see light emerging from the impact.
And if you're watching the video here, what I've been messing around with for the past couple episodes, this was a little tchotchke that our friends at Adidas gave out that has their little bow tie lattice, and it works wonderfully as a stress ball. I can squish it and it redirects the force in a direction, and it's easier to squish in one direction than another. And it's a nice little 3D printed thing from carbon.
It's amazing what you can do with light and oxygen.
I know. So I've heard. So we go from successful asteroid shots to maybe failed moon shots by way of Google, and probably the top tech story this week, where I want to start off with, was the announcement that Stadia is shutting down, or will be shut down at the beginning of 2023, next year. Come January 18th, all the service will be gone, and Google is refunding hardware, software, and DLC purchases. And its dream of cloud gaming is done.
Worst kept secret in tech for probably about a year. There was so many signs that Google was abandoning Stadia. Going back, I think 18 months, when we saw them, shut down some in-house game development operations. Stadia wasn't meant, even last, or what was it, 2 weeks ago, when the Logitech handheld device came out, Stadia wasn't listed as one of the cloud services. Like, there are all these signs all over the place. I'm really impressed that Google's actually refunding all the hardware and software.
Hardware purchases. I mean, that tells you two things. It tells you maybe not a lot of people bought hardware or games on Stadia that they could afford to do the refunds. And it also says, Google looked at the math, and it would cost more for them to try to operate the business than it would be to actually just refund everyone, which they didn't have to do. Terms of service probably allowed them to say, service is done. So kudos to them for actually refunding it. Those true believers.
I'm a little surprised that Google didn't sell, and when I say sell, actually, have some sort of talent acquisition with Microsoft or Nvidia, who are the last two people standing in the cloud gaming world. I don't mean now. I mean like 6 months ago, 12 months ago. When the writing was already on the wall. I'm very curious where they redeploy the Stadia teams. Obviously, we're entering a period, and there's commentary from Sundar that, there's going to be some reorganizing and shuffling of the decks at Google. That's true of a lot of tech companies. I'm very curious, do they push some of the Stadia people into anything that's really intriguing to us here at Tested, like AR kind of stuff, or if they just get reshuffled into other products at large.
Well, I think the two companies you mentioned, and there are three places, right? There's the competing services for cloud gaming right now, which we're not going to talk about what PlayStation's been doing, but successful ones in terms of xCloud and GeForce Now. NVIDIA has a leg up on that because they don't have to pay for the hardware. They're making the hardware, and they don't have to run. But Google had
and people
to buy
are paying
servers.
$1 billion for their hardware right now.
Yes, and for NVIDIA, they've built servers. They sell the stuff. They sell the hardware for them to run it locally, and then still also have a subscription service for people. Right, that kind of makes sense as a business. I don't know how well it's doing as a business, but still makes sense for them to invest in that, because as their hardware gets better, the service also gets better. For Microsoft, they have the strength of Xbox. They have the strength of Game Pass as a sister program, and like I think just a better brand recognition, and just they have the IP, they have the studios that they've acquired, right? So for them, it's not like they have more money than Google, but they also have the back end too. They have Azure, so they have the infrastructure and a good business reason. They were already established in gaming. Google also had partners in which that Stadia was running the tech behind. So AT&T was using Stadia for like demos of games, and AT&T would be providing the bandwidth to do this on 5G phones. And so that feels like maybe even though Stadia as a consumer-facing service will go away, the reason there wasn't any acqui-hire was that Google will still be providing backend and using some of that tech, compression tech, low latency tech that was developed for Stadia, not necessarily for gaming, but in other partners and kind of B2B services. Yeah, it's so funny. We talked about, this is what was Stadia too early for its time, and like Google felt like they went in at a time where it wasn't, because there were other companies that went in that were too early for their time, like OnLive, and Google had all the data about how people were using internet and the infrastructure in the US. They didn't have the expectation of a global pandemic, but you could make the argument that that was a ripe time for them to really bolster Stadia. But it seems like just a poor execution of the kind of service and how much it costs to charge a monthly subscription in addition to people having to buy games without it being full featured at launch with all the things they'd promised.
I understand that perspective, and it very well may be right, but I'm going to go on, into some groups on Google Wave, and just message them and just read all of the notifications and stories in Google Reader tonight. Maybe this is just more to their just how they operate as a company. This is just their thing. They'll stand up things, and 3 years in, if it's not working, goodbye. It is. I see this almost as business as normal for them, as opposed to. I mean, yeah, you could say failed execution and all of those things, and I'd have a hard time disagreeing, but it's also just how Google runs and has run for years.
Yeah. And a lot of these big companies kind of pivot where to where the fads are, and thankfully not NFTs or necessarily crypto in this case, but if Google has leased or owned data servers with graphics processing and GPU processing, I could see them pivoting or turning that resource to AI generated content, for example, as a way that they could just reallocate and redirect on a very hot emerging field right now.
I hope it's AR instead of AI content.
Why not both? I think when you're talking about the need to generate content freely or just on a compute basis, right? For platforms, next gen platforms like VR and AR, especially AR, that's absolutely a powerful thing. Yeah, because we want to see 3D objects, we want to see content, and they can get an infinite amount of that stuff using AI. But cloud gaming is not dead, far from it. And while we talked about the Logitech handheld last week, Razer has now partnered with Qualcomm and Verizon to announce also a dedicated piece of hardware, which is doing the thing that the Logitech handheld did not do, which is 5G game streaming. It's called the Razer Edge 5G, and they're going to show more come October at, I didn't even know this was a thing, a RazerCon.
RazerCon? You don't have your tickets to RazerCon? You don't have your RazerCon cosplay ready to go? Yeah, so putting RazerCon aside, and I hope people go as like Razor from the Red Lantern Corps. That would be really dope. But anyways, 5G gaming set. I think our commentary 2 weeks ago when Logitech announced this, do you really need 5G for cloud gaming? And our kind of take was like, no, it's not reliable enough. I think even when you have 5G ultra band, unless you're in like very specific places. So if you're playing gaming in that one spot on your corner in this urban city, I think it's great. But I'm much more interested in the internals. I'm sure we'll get much more about the processor on board, how Verizon is going to be supporting this bandwidth wise, but I kind of want to just feel it too. I think at the end of the day, like that's what matters about the handheld sets is how it feels in your hands, and then the library of games it has available.
Yeah, and the thing I'm most curious about is that wireless performance. Is whether over 5G connection in the places where Verizon is strong, that this can be a compelling alternative to streaming something to your phone. Like, why not just play on your phone and use one of those, Kishi controller phone wraps? And the pricing. If they price it like a phone, then nah, that's not going to be so great. They got to make money on the subscription service on your cell service. So those are the big tech stories that happened this week. We have more tech at the end of the show because we do have a long interview about EVs. We have a special guest joining us. But before we get to that, a few pop culture things happened this week. No bigger news than the shocking news. I don't know who could have seen this coming. If you don't want to be spoiled about MCU news, you've probably heard this, but you can jump forward on the show. But Ryan Reynolds announced Deadpool 3 this week, coming September 2024, so 2 years away, starring Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. Wolverine's back.
Hugh Jackman one last time. Wolverine. Because there's equal possibility it'd be Hugh Jackman's character from any number of his like musical numbers. Like Hugh Jackman from Les Mis could have been in Deadpool 3 and we would have believed it.
Swordfish.
Yeah. You name it. It could have been it. So the king of cheap mobile devices and brand name celebrity alcohol Vodkas, is back at it again.
Or tequila, yeah.
And it was a very good Deadpool commercial. He basically apologized for not being at D23 and said, like, I've been hard at work at Deadpool 3 and I haven't come up with any ideas. Then Hugh Jackman whacks in the background and he says, will you be in the movie? He's like, yeah, sure. There is a history of Deadpool and Wolverine having spats in the comics. So
very similar powers.
Yeah. So I imagine this is going to be 2 hours of them beating the crap out of each other and regenerating and then just beating the crap out of each other some more. And sign me up.
Okay. So a couple things. One, Wolverine, as has been established in both the comics and also movie canon, while he ages very slowly, he does age. That's why in Logan he did look older and his powers are a little weaker. So even though Hugh Jackman is going to be 55, I believe, by the time this movie comes out, he's going to hit the gym and he'll be in Wolverine shape for this. I have full confidence in his ability to get back into Wolverine shape. But one last time, I mean, we thought he hung up his claws after Logan. And speaking of Logan, they did address this in a follow-up video, saying that this will not erase Logan from the canon. That Logan takes place in 2029, I believe, and so this is going to be a precursor to what happened in Logan at best.
When the multiverse is here, anything is possible.
It's true.
Like,
it's true.
You explain away anything in like the snap of your fingers.
True. But they did acknowledge this as Deadpool's foray into the MCU. And MCU was specifically acknowledged, and Kevin Feige as well, right? So it's under that guidance. I don't think they're going to discard what happened under Fox, and Logan was the kind of the bookend to that. We know mutants are coming. We know mutants are a big part of it. I think it's been acknowledged even that Namor is a mutant in Wakanda Forever. By the way, second longest MCU movie, given its reported running time, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Very excited for that. If this is a way, as some have theorized, for them to incursion into the Fox Marvel universe and end that universe somehow, with Deadpool being its lone surviving member, I'd be okay with that too. It neatly ties it up as a place to never return to.
Yeah, and just go nuts. That's my sort of motto for this movie. We should also acknowledge director for Blade dropped out of that movie, and the vibe check around that movie is not good. And so I'd be very curious. I would expect that movie to at least get pushed back, if not pushed off the calendar, while some attention and probably some rewrites is coming that way.
Yeah. I think they were 2 months away from principal photography on that, so that's really sad about that. But don't know the circumstances, but it was not a well-known director, but director of independent films and projects that we want to see new voices and new perspectives, and not necessarily an established director. And we've seen a lot of cases now where directors have left Marvel projects, and the movies that we've gotten out of that are fine, but you always wonder what if and what could have been if they had let a director fulfill their vision for a character. No, they're not bringing Wesley Snipes back though, right? Like I think you know what the other thing that came out of the Deadpool 3 news is even though Hugh Jackman says this is one last time, you had these fans wishing and hoping for a Hugh Jackman and Tobey Maguire and Wesley Snipes team up in Secret Wars, a true multiversal saga finale with the Marvel of the past. Marvel Entertainment Films of yesteryear. I look in your face, Kishore says, no, thank you.
Like when we're at the point where we're having nostalgia about movies I remember going to as an adult, and I'm like, I don't like this.
Yeah, well,
nostalgia for when I was a kid, I get.
Yeah,
nostalgia for when I saw Blade at like the UA in Berkeley is not doing it for me.
Except I guess the difference is with Spider-Man No Way Home, when you had Tobey Maguire, it wasn't just the kids who watched Spider-Man in 2002 and now are grown up 20 years later. It was also all the kids who watched Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man after that, who for them, they watched on DVD or streaming or whatever it was, and still recognize that. I don't know if there are a lot of millennials, post-millennials, whatever they're called now, who watch the Wesley Snipes Blade movies or the original X-Men movies.
Yeah, and when he goes, always bet on black, people aren't going to get it because that other movie didn't make sense. The difference is Tobey Maguire in the Spider-Man movie raised the stakes for Tom Holland's Spider-Man and forced him to make the choice that he didn't want to make, because that's the burden that Spider-Man carry.
Yeah.
A Tobey Maguire in Secret Wars is going to be like, hey, that's Tobey Maguire.
So like Doctor Strange in Multiverse of Madness.
Exactly.
Hey, that's that guy that the internet wanted to be that guy. Yeah. Yeah, I take your point. Yep. And that's the risk. How do you get these things to land? And how do you make it actually feel emotionally resonant? Fox, of course, still running as a studio, still making its bets on things like, is Avatar under Fox now or under Disney, the banner? Like, will we see, is it Fox Studios? Will that be the opening title card, or will be like the Disney?
I just think it's a giant face of Jim Cameron. That's all that will be there.
Give me your money. They're also, Fox Studios has announced that another one of their big franchises is getting a sequel. It's the next phase, continuing on from the previous trilogy that Matt Reeves directed of the Planet of the Apes, but they're starting a whole new trilogy, a whole new series of films in that universe. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is the title, and production begins next month for release in 2024 as well. So all these things that Fox announced that's coming out in 2024.
We're inching closer to the Dr. Zaius standalone film where we can get the Simpsons musical number.
Yes.
Dr. Zaius back in.
Yes. A whole new chapter in the Planet of the Apes saga, which says that it's going to continue on. It probably won't be Caesar's story. It will star a different primary ape, played by Owen Teague from The Stand and It. And the director is Wes Ball, who did the Maze Runner films, and also notably was the director attached to the Mouse Guard film that went along production. Yeah. So
interesting.
Very interesting in that, experience with that type of
world builder.
Exactly. And creature
That's
work
what Maze Runner was
as well.
too.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Post-apocalyptic there. There will be human characters, which they should have the guts to do a Planet of the Apes movie with no human characters. Like, I don't like it. I don't think it's necessary. Let's just have CG apes. It's fine. You don't need the human connection. Like, they feel so disposable.
Yeah, I would think the next trilogy would be the apes battling each other, and like civil war, factions, different things breaking out.
So at some point, you have to enter like the planet, like tell the story of just the apes, right? How the society builds up. Like it's any humans that they have, their fate is already determined, right? Like, anyway, okay.
The whole arc of this is to show, like the first arc is to show humanity's ego and how they destroyed the planet, and then like the second trilogy, you'd show the apes fall prey to the same foibles of man, and like maybe
Animal
you change
Farm
the ending
style.
Yeah, this is. I think we're starting to understand why I'm never allowed to write a script ever for Hollywood.
Yes. We on the internet should not. No, fun to riff about, but no, let's not take ourselves too seriously. All right. Going back to the Bruce Willis Armageddon reference, also announced this week. Now, I read this on Collider, but not exactly sure. Has it been confirmed? Yeah, the Telegraph had a story on this, but Bruce Willis, who has retired from acting, it's been reported by the Telegraph that he is signed with a U.S. firm called Deep Cake to allow his likeness to be used on screen for future projects using computer-generated image manipulation, deepfake technology.
So, putting aside one of the worst names for a company I've heard in a long time, Deep Cake, this is brilliant. So, all reports are that Bruce Willis has retired from acting because of illness. Bruce Willis is one of those people that if you see him in a cameo, you'd be like, "Wow, that's Bruce Willis," and like you can surprise people. And this technology, as it stands, maybe not ready for prime time for somebody throughout a film, but for a cameo, maybe this works. And who better to start with than him?
Well,
given the situation.
Yes, given the situation, yes. If you go to deepcake.io, Kishore, you should go there right now. They have sample footage. And this is not for cameos. This is literally for like things like the Surface cameo. Because we're talking about they explicitly call out
I take
brand
it all back.
Endorsement videos with celebrities and influencers. These will be for advertisements. This will be for starring in films. Basically, any gig an actor would have previously taken using the power of their likeness. Their digital double, they'll hire a physical stand-in and replace their face with an AI-generated version of you if you sign with them, like Bruce Willis did. That's what they're promising, a digital twin. And if you scroll down, you see their client, single client right now, or single signee, Bruce Willis.
So I hate this now. Because it's all like advertisements, like fake Bruce Willis selling me Cialis pills, or fake Bruce Willis selling me crypto.com ads. Like, that's the way this is for me. I was into it when it was like, oh, he'll be a surprise cameo in like Ocean's 14 or something like that. Like,
no reason it couldn't be, right? They would just have to go broker through this agency that represents and has the rights of that likeness. There was a film that came out in 2013 called The Congress. It was a part live action, part animated film, rotoscoped, I believe, for some live action or for the animated parts, directed by Ari Folman, who directed Waltz with Bashir, I want to say, the animated film, and also recently did Where's Anne Frank. But the whole idea of the Congress was this idea. It started Robin Wright pen, and the premise of the film is Robin Wright like plays herself, a version of herself, who sells her likeness to be in future films, the idealized version of herself as she was in Robin Wright in the swashbuckling
House of Cards.
No, not House of Cards.
What movie are you talking about? Princess Bride?
Princess Bride. Thank you. Princess Bride. Yeah, Robin Wright, as in Princess Bride, or any version of her, like she goes into a light stage style room with all these, and they do like a light stage version of capturing her digital likeness, and then she basically signs away her rights to be in any film in the future. And it gets more existential and surreal than that in this movie, but it's essentially that idea, but happening for real in 2022. And no need for a light stage style scan of your face, because with deepfake technology, they can just take the library of existing video and fill in the blanks, as they've done with Mark Hamill and Luke Skywalker. So it's kind of the brave new world of digital likeness, digital twinning, celebrity. Like, if the supply and demand, if the economics of this prove to work out, and there is demand for the movie stars of the 20th century to have their likeness endure, because it was an era that people could the age of movie stars, where society as a whole could gather around personalities and actors that were like the singular A-listers, right? Right now, like when we talk about has the idea of the movie star died, it's because there's so much media, so many influencers and actors and content creators that you can't rally around, your George Clooney's and your Julia Roberts and the big icons of Hollywood. It could be that generation of actor lives on forever by signing their likeness away.
I hate this so much, partially because you can imagine the Stan Lee situation where there is disreputable trustees of the estate that are like, yeah, $500 here, $1,000 there, likeness everywhere. And because the technology should be able to drive down the cost, you could just flood the market. And that will make me sad. So I hope that's not where we end up.
I wholly believe that if this was available 5 years ago, Stan Lee would have signed up for it, probably, or his state. Yeah, and that's there's danger of exploitation in all ways of that word, and yeah, it is a scary new frontier. But someone's got to be the first, and and these firms are popping up, and Bruce Willis, a version of him, when we see him in the next Super Bowl ad, we can point to this and say, wow, they did it. And if it resonates, then we'll probably see more of it. Last story before we jump into our special guest and interview is Meta has, we're doing our weekly AI check, our check into AI generated imagery. And Meta has unveiled a new system called Make a Video, which is not an AI text to image generator, but it is an AI text to video generator.
This is crazy to me. Like, because you have to not just generate the static image, and it has all the artifacts that you see in DALL-E imagery, but then like you also have to showcase how it like changes over time.
Yep. And anyone who's used those AI models, it's you're cherry picking the best stuff. There's like each model that's out there that's accessible to the public has their strengths and their styles that they work best on based on the algorithms and based on the source imagery that they've pulled from. But to do videos, you have to be consistent, and there has to be reinforcement between the frames. Right now, this Make a Video model only generates 5-second videos. It's not publicly accessible. So what's being shared online right now is what was provided to reporters by Meta.
There's also a research paper that everyone can read about some of the results.
And it looks like nightmare imagery. It literally looks like how you would remember a dream or a nightmare.
Yeah, which isn't dissimilar to, I think, what the DALL-E 1 looked like too when you first saw it. It is very reminiscent of those early iterations. And if it follows the same trajectory we saw with like going from DALL-E 1 to DALL-E 2, you would imagine, 6 months from now, we're talking about Make a Video 2 having a lot of those artifacts be eliminated. I get what you're saying about the dream sequence. There is something kind of surreal about these items that make you, and they also chose like a dog flying or a teddy bear and like these things that are evocative of a dreamscape. But to me, it looks fundamentally like DALL-E 1 imagery. I'm so curious how they translate into motion.
Yeah, well, they explain a little bit in the paper.
Read a paper.
Right, that this is, as opposed to the AI text to image models, they weren't just doing that with multiple frames and then combining the frames. The input data sets here was specifically video. So the models trained on hundreds of thousands of hours of footage, and to analyze movement and continuity in a frame and all the stuff that you would need to prompt for a video. And even with that, they were only generating 16 sequential frames at 64 by 64 pixels. But what we know from AI imagery is that that kind of diffusion model, you can take low res 64 by 64 frames and extrapolate to something an order of magnitude larger. In this case, 768 by 768 frames, taking those 16 individual frames and then blowing them up using another AI model.
I get what you're saying. I guess part of this is like, it was trained on video, and that gives it some like temporal data so they can create the motion, but it's also creating motion of the background that isn't specified in the text.
Right. Yes.
And that true. To me, I'm like, how is the training? Like, how is it modeling something like that? And so I think there's some. Now I have to read a paper. That's
You're absolutely right, because the model has no contextual information about what the final image is. It literally is just going for accuracy based on closeness to what it has understood a subject to look like, but it doesn't know like your foreground, background. It's not analyzing in that way on a per frame basis, or on a per iteration basis when they're generating these. Yeah, it's crazy stuff, and I think I agree. It looks very rudimentary now, but it's only a matter of time before this gets high resolution, more frames, and something that could be recognizable as video. That you don't have to kind of blur your eyes to see. We're going to switch over gears now. We have an interview we recorded earlier with a longtime friend of mine, Roberto Baldwin, who's a journalist who covers electric vehicles. And we wanted to get him on to give us a sense of what the current landscape of EVs are, as in the United States, recent legislation has just been passed to incentivize the transition from gas-powered vehicles to EVs. And a lot of people we know, including you listeners out there, may be curious about whether it's the right time to invest in an electric vehicle. You yourself included, sure, right?
Mm-hmm. I am very much in the market, and I have been incredibly scared off by the markups going on, and also, frankly, confused because there are so many different car types, battery differences, charging infrastructure differences, design differences that are emerging, where you can't compare apples to apples anymore. It's apples, oranges, pineapples, kumquats, every fruit on the market is out there, but you can't buy a single one of them right now at the same time. And so it really spurred my thinking, and it was a really interesting, enlightening conversation. Surprising, I would say, in points.
All right, so let's take a listen to our conversation with Robbie Baldwin about EVs. So we're super thrilled to have on the podcast a guest and longtime friend, Robbie Baldwin. Robbie, I've known you for a while now. It's good to see you. This is a great excuse to reconnect in the whole pandemic. But how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I think I've just realized that we've known each other for over a decade, 13 years, 14 years.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so
Robbie
old.
and I used to work in dead media. We saw the transition from print magazines to blogs, and from blogs, which were just repurposed articles from magazines, and occasionally, live blogs, to now the new media of what's out there now. But you have been all over the place, and your focus now is on EVs. Like you've written for Wired, Engadget, Car and Driver, but you are our guy in EVs because I see you've reviewed cars, you've been to briefings, you've kind of surveyed the market, and we have questions.
Oh, so yeah, I have lots of answers, and I've literally been everywhere, all over the world now with cars. Somehow I transitioned from covering iPhones to cars. It's a good scam if you can pull it off.
I think it's legit. It's the frontier. So going from phones to cars makes sense, and it just continues the thread of you and Norm working on industries that are dying and being reborn.
That's right.
So why don't we level set? I'm in the market for an EV, but before we get to specific cars and all of that, let's talk about sort of the landscape. I think we're used to looking at this through a US lens where adoption has largely been Tesla. Now all of a sudden we're seeing some new cars come on the market. Can you give us a picture of what this looks like across the world, and who's kind of really leading the way when it comes to electric vehicle production and on the consumer side?
Yeah, globally, especially Europe and Asia, certain parts of Asia, China specifically, EV adoption the rate is much higher. China, and a lot of this has to do with regulatory issues. In China and in Norway, where there's a much larger adoption of EVs, the government essentially said, "Hey, if you buy an EV, you won't have to wait for your license, or you get free parking, or you don't have to pay taxes on it." There's all these incentives in these countries in order to get people behind the wheel of an EV versus a gas-powered vehicle. China is famous for its sort of terrible air quality. Norway is Norway. They want to make sure it still looks pretty. And so you have these countries that are really pushing for the adoption, whereas in the United States it's a little bit different. We have a tax rebate up until recently where you bought the car, but you didn't get that $7,500 back right away. you had to like hope that you had a $7,500 like tax worth of taxes that you owed, and hope that you got that back. And and with the new bill it's sort of a mess on what vehicles are available, but it is cash up front essentially if you're buying an EV. So that should help once they figure out like what vehicles are available. But around the world, they're Europe, especially in China, they're being very proactive, the governments, in order to remove gas-powered vehicles from the road.
It feels like the takeaway is incentives work. Incentives both for manufacturers and for consumers, but a lot of the incentives may be in the 5 years ago, the early days of full EVs, not just hybrid cars in the United States and California specifically, were incentivizing purchase of still relatively high-end cars. Like the market wasn't putting out the fantasy of a $30,000 car for a standard household, a new car. That's still not really there yet. And then when those incentives kind of went away because of manufacturers reaching the limit of how many cars they were making, it really benefited, I think, a lot of maybe upper middle class people who are buying Teslas, right?
Oh yeah, and the Model S essentially.
Yeah, those on the road, absolutely. But I think that we see that you mentioned legislation in the States here. We have pending new legislation recently signed that's supposed to be renewing the incentives again for a whole new marketplace now that manufacturers feel like there's a market and it's a good business decision for GMs of the world to really pivot to EVs.
Yeah, and it really helps because GM and Tesla and Toyota was coming up on the end of its availability for the tax incentives. They had hit their cap. They had hit the cap, all three of those companies. And so, if you got a Chevy Bolt, you had to pay for full price for a Bolt. If you bought a Model 3, you had to pay full price for a Model 3. And eventually, as the Toyotas, it trickles down the way. But you're eventually with Toyota, when they were using hybrids, you're going to have to pay full price for a hybrid within, I think, 2 years. And so IRA sort of changed that, where there are no more caps. So, and I didn't think the caps were fair because it essentially was telling these automakers, hey, good job. Now you don't get anything. So, it wasn't really, I didn't think it was fair to Tesla. I didn't think it was fair to GM. I don't think it was fair to Toyota with their hybrids, where, you're doing a good job reducing the, your vehicle's impact on the world, but now you don't get to take part in this anymore. So that's gone away, but it's which vehicles are available. The vehicle has to be built in the United States. The battery, most of the battery has to be sourced here. And so there's a lot of stuff going on that they're still trying to figure out. And the IRS will put out a list eventually, hopefully by the end of this year, that'll tell you, okay, this is how much money you'll get back for each vehicle that's available in the United States right now. So, and there's also now caps. So before you could buy, a $150,000 EV and get $7,500 back. That doesn't happen anymore. Now it's about $70,000, $80,000. It depends on, if you're buying a truck or you're buying an SUV or you're buying a sedan. Like it's a sort of a sliding scale. Sedans get less money, or they have a lower cap price wise. So, but if you're buying a $150,000 or $100,000 car, I don't think a $7,500 tax credit is really anything you've been worried about. I mean, it's nice, but
it should be for you. It should not be for you.
I don't know what that incentivizes beyond bad behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah. So but if you're, if you're middle class or lower, or below that, and you're trying to buy a $20,000, $25,000 car, if you can get $7,500 off, let's say a Chevy Bolt, which are, starting below 30, you can get a Chevy Bolt for probably 22 once if it all works out the way everyone hopes when it comes to these incentives.
Yeah, I saw an article today that came out in the New York Times that said like 25% of new auto purchases in China are electric vehicles. And I just my eyes open wide because I can't even imagine what that would look like in the US. But kind of pivoting to the US market, I think it was dominated by Tesla, still dominated by Tesla. But I'm curious if you can give your kind of take on some of the newer electric car models that are coming out, and what do you feel like is exciting about the cars that are coming onto the marketplace now that people are just getting their hands on?
Where the real excitement is, and if you had said this 10, 15 years ago, someone would have slapped you in the face. Hyundai, the Hyundai Motor Group. Hyundai is doing what everyone would have anticipated that Honda and Toyota would have been doing, with EVs. The Hyundai Motor Group, they have the Ioniq 5, which looks like a 90s, pixel-based...
pixel car.
It's a pixel car, and they have the EV6, and they have the Genesis GX60. So they have these 3 EVs that are just, all 3 of them are outstanding. They're wonderful to drive, but they're also on an 800-volt architecture. Most EVs right now are still on a 400-volt. So these vehicles, and they start about $45,000 to $50,000. They will charge quicker than, say, the EQS, which is the new Mercedes-Benz, S-class of EVs. That'll charge at like 200 kilowatts, because it's hitting the top level of 400 kilowatts. Meanwhile, the Hyundai over in the corner will charge it to something, 270. That's crazy. And all 3 of them are wonderful to drive. They all have a ton of room in them. They all have a very particular design, which makes them stand out. So when you see one on the road, it does not look like, a CR-V and a RAV4 and, the CX, whatever from Mazda. They all sort of look the same. When you see those Hyundais on the road, okay. When you see that EV6, when you see that Ioniq 5, it stands out. It stands out as much as the Teslas did when they came out. So if anyone should be concerned about any EV, if you're another automaker, you don't even worry about Tesla anymore, because Tesla's killer app is the charging network. Everyone's caught up to their battery technology. Everyone's caught up to their motors. Everyone's caught up to over the air. It's that charging network. That charging network is key to keeping Tesla people around. But when it comes to vehicles and what's happening, check out whatever the Hyundai Motor Group is putting out, because those are pretty great.
It's funny because, we mentioned we both covered phones for a long time, and now we're different types of emerging technologies, but there are a lot of parallels, and it feels like the early days of smartphones, and that there are these like base level specs. I remember, when we were covering phones, everyone was about screen size and maybe battery life. But there are nuances in the things that people should consider and what's actually valuable and the utility. And I feel like there's a lot of similarities when people are shopping for a car. People are looking for price and range, feel like the top line things. But what are the other considerations that you think they should be caring about, or that they, that are just like charging speeds, or the type of the drive feel, the UI? What are the things that people aren't looking at as much?
I think people aren't really thinking about the charging speed. I mean, we talk about range anxiety. The reality is that it's charging anxiety. Because if you get let's say the new Chevy Bolt, the Chevy Bolt EUV is a great, inexpensive crossover, but it only charges at speed up to 50 kilowatts, which is pretty slow.
What does that mean, like in terms of number of miles per hour type of thing?
So it will take, let me see, I think it's 45, no. God, I should have done some math. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, this is a math.
This is the confusing thing, right?
This is and this is the confusing thing for your average person. So let's say every hour you'll get 50 kilowatts, and the battery is 60 something kilowatts. So after about an hour, you will have probably about 170, 180 miles.
Because you're going to be at like 75, 80% battery capacity, and then you multiply that by the theoretical maximum range of the battery when it's new.
So then you look at what Hyundai, and it's an 80 kilowatt hour battery, but it charges at, say, 250 kilowatts. Yeah. Now you're talking like 15 minutes.
All right, 20 minutes for a full battery.
Yeah, like 12 minutes. And it's typically they're doing the calculation from about 10 to 80%. Right, 10, 15. Because after 80%, same as your battery on your phone, it takes longer for it to charge because everything has to be moved around. I think the best analogy someone gave me is you have 100 people and you have a theater that has 100 seats. And initially, the first 80% of the theater gets filled up pretty quickly. But that last 20%, it's going to take them a while because people are looking around for their seats and trying to find a spot. And that's what it's like when you're charging really any lithium-ion battery. But it's very noticeable when you're talking about cars because the battery is so much larger than, say, your phone.
Do the cars all have the software like the Teslas do in terms of prepping the batteries? Like have ushers moving the electrons around to say, let's create some big room here because we're charging the next 30 minutes and then we can charge faster? Some
do. Some have typically a heat pump or something in order to prep the battery and in order to get it ready. Usually those are on high-end vehicles. So if you're looking at I'll just keep going back to the Chevy Bolt. That's a $25,000 car. So it's not going to have all the bells and whistles of, say, a $60,000 Tesla or $50,000 Ioniq 5 or an e-tron or whatever. These are the vehicle, those high-end vehicles. They'll typically prepare the vehicle, knowing that it's going to a charging station, prepare the vehicle in order so it charges as quickly as possible. Some of the lower end, and then this is another thing that Tesla has related to that charging network, is that it knows it's going to that charger. And so you have to tell if you're not in a Tesla, you're like, hey, I'm going to a charger. You need to, start prepping, and you tell it it's going to a charger. And most of the smarter ones will be like, oh, I'm going to a charge station. So before I get there, I need to get the battery ready to go in order to charge it quicker. And here's the whole thing, is that you might get there, you might do everything right, and then the charging station might not charge as quickly as it's supposed to. And this is something we saw with Tesla early on, where, I had a Model 3. I went to a charging station. I was charging at 7 kilowatts. And I was like, well, I'm going to be here for days. And so people are kind of sort of seeing that with like the Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint, like sort of the big three right now, where, sometimes you get there and it's great. And other times you get there and it's like, well, it's charging, I have this car that charges at 250 kilowatts, but right now it's charging at 40 kilowatts. And you're just like, well.
So that remains a massive competitive advantage for Tesla. But for how long? Because there is a lot of money in that new bill that's coming forth to build new charging infrastructure. And there seems to be a lot of rumors and discussion that Tesla is going to just have to open up their network to other cars in some timescale. How long till we see like that choice of car not have to come down to, can I charge it reliably wherever I go?
I think we're going to see about in 2 years. I'm guessing there would be parity, where people have Electrify America, EVgo, the other charging networks, where they have the money and they've gotten the money from the government, where they're able to disperse and put more charging stations out there, but also making sure those charging stations are actually working. That's part of the bill, is that the charging stations have to actually work. And, Electrify America was essentially built because Volkswagen did Dieselgate. Electrify America is part of Volkswagen. They had to do something. They're like, hey, you got to do something to make EVs better. And so they started this charging network. And they've been really good at getting the chargers out there. It's just that it's far more difficult for them to charge cars than it is for Tesla. Tesla, the software handshake is, one system and one system. Whereas Electrify America, EVgo, ChargePoint, it's every single EV that comes out, they have to take it into the chart, to their company, and they have to make sure that the software talks to each other, and then say, okay, well, this EV, EV6 will work with this charging. Okay, let's get this right. Or this Lucid Air will work. Every vehicle has to be tested. So it's sort of weird, because it's like, if every time a car came out, you had to go to the gas station and make sure the hole, the spout went in the hole. And then like adjusting their hole and adjusting your hole. Like, okay, now out in the world, this car will be able to get gas. So it's this very weird. And they have to figure it out. They have to come up with a universal system that says, it's just metadata. It just says this car will charge this fast, this charge, this is how much battery capacity it has. And that's it. Because right now you end up with like these really weird issues, and it slows everyone down, because every time an EV comes out, it has to go to, like, say, the Electrify America.
The analogy to phones is just like jumping off the page with like a million different chargers. Yeah. Everyone is carrying dongles in their trunk for their car.
It is. You're just driving around with dongles, and I mean, if you have a Tesla and you somehow get off the Tesla network, you have to get a dongle. So you have like essentially a CCS dongle, so you can do DC fast charging.
I imagine over time, though, because the other question I have is about where battery technology is right now and efficiencies in motors. And is there, like, when we recommend people buy phones or laptops, everyone's waiting, is this a generational jump, or are we at the end of a jump? Like, where are we in terms of batteries and the kind of like sweet spot for range? Are car makers still pushing for 300, 400, 500 miles, or are they going to stick to like 300-ish as a sweet spot for price and technology? And how does that relate to the behavior of people charging at home versus the demand for charging on the road?
Everyone's still working with lithium ion. That's an LFP. So it's essentially the same technology where everyone's sort of but everyone is adjusting their chemistry a little bit here and a little bit there, and we'll use these modules and we'll do this. But it really comes down to chemistry when it comes to the batteries that are available right now. And if you want a 400 or 500 mile range vehicle, you're paying a lot of money because you're adding more battery. But because you're adding more battery, you're adding more weight. So it becomes a losing game, which is why EV long haul semi trucks should not be electric vehicles. They should be hydrogen or something else, because it's a losing game. In order to keep those long haul trucks on the road, you have to add more battery pack, which means they can't haul as much, and it's you end up in this circle of like, well, we need to add some more weight, but we need more battery. Yeah. So I'm thinking what most people, when you buy a gas car, if you told someone 10 years ago, what's the range of your gas car? No, I don't know. I just keep driving until it hits a quarter of a tank, and then I go to the gas station. So I think what's going to happen is people are still going to look for 300 and 400 mile ranges. We're getting more and more vehicles. I think 250 is sort of the baseline for most people at this point, and then anything above that is sweet. But the reality is most people don't drive as much as they think they do, and most people don't do road trips. Road trips was a big thing, 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. But then fewer and fewer, airlines got super cheap. You can get on a plane for like a nickel now. I mean, it's not fun, but you can get on a plane for a nickel. And so because of that, like the road trip has sort of gone away for most people. And so what happens is that people think they need 400 miles of range. They don't realize that 400 miles of range is about 8.5, 9 hours in a car. No one sits in their car for 8.5,
Very
outside
few.
of, the edge cases, most people don't do that. And so you're going to pull over, you're going to want to sit down and eat. And while you're doing that, you could pull your car in and you can charge it up, and then you can continue on your way. So we're still looking at lithium and LFP. What's fun about solid state is that it's always 5 years away. Solid state batteries have been 5 years away for the last 15 years. But there are bigger players who are putting money in Toyota, Samsung. I just talked to Mercedes-Benz about it. Everyone is looking into it, but they all know that it's going to be lithium ion, at least for a little while. Yeah. But they're all like working on making their chemistry and making their vehicles more efficient. It's all about efficiency now, because the more efficient you can make the battery pack, the smaller you can get the pack to get the same amount of miles. So if your pack is, let's say 100 kilowatts to do 300 miles, if you can get it down to 80 kilowatts to do 300 miles, well, you just saved a bunch of weight, which you saved a bunch of money. So all this stuff sort of snowballs, but it's still, I think people are looking at probably 300 miles is probably what people are looking for when they're talking about 400 miles. I'm like, I do though.
It's psychological. I think there are two things about it, and the psychological. It's like 300 is this nice, sweet number that's kind of a very comparable to what we thought of a standard compact or mid-sized sedan for gas range had for the longest time. There's the behavior of it of like, you used to charge or refill your gas tank once a week, once every 2 weeks, depending on how long your commute is. But you got to really switch over to the charge every night, leave your car plugged in, in the mornings or overnight, kind of the phone charging model, right?
Yeah, and that's a hard change for people to understand. It's hard to understand that every morning when you get up, if you have an EV and you have somewhere to charge, this, if you live in an apartment, this becomes far more complicated. But if you live in a house or you have an apartment that allows charging, when you get up in the morning, your car is full of, let's say, gas. Imagine every day you got up and your car was full of gas, or at least 3/4 of a tank of gas was every single morning. So the idea is like, well, if I go to charge, it's going to take like, an hour. Well, not if you just charge it at night. It's such a weird
like your phone.
change.
It's like your laptop or your phone.
Yeah. So it's a very weird sort of like trying to get people's brains to sort of click. And I don't think the government, I don't think like most of the big media, New York Times, Washington Post, which, they're nice people over there, but I think it's been very difficult to sort of explain the nuances and what all of this means, unless you're someone who reads a tech site or B, an automotive site. Outside of that, I'm constantly explaining to people, I'm like, imagine you got up and your car was full of gas already every day and you never had to go to the gas station. They're like, oh, that'd be nice. I'm like, that's what it's like to have an EV.
But on the flip side, I'll say psychologically, when you say there's like a 300 mile, rated range, in my mind, that's 240. That's because I'm never going to want it to drop under 20%. Right. Yeah. And I'm never going to charge it to 100% because I want to keep it in that sweet spot of like 20 to 80, 90% capacity, like you do a phone, or have it kind of regulated by itself.
Yeah.
Also, there's degradation, over time. There's like,
battery degradation.
Yeah. And so
cold
if you're buying
weather,
a car,
weather,
exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Cold, if you live in a cold weather climate.
So if you're buying a car that you think you're going to use for 10 years, like I still think, even if you think you're only going to drive like 50 miles regularly, as a thing, you still want 250 to 300 because you're like, you don't want to be in that worst case. A 100-mile range isn't going to be enough, I think, over 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is that I think what the automakers have realized recently is that the batteries don't degrade as much as they anticipated.
Oh.
What Mercedes realized, so they had the EQXX, which is sort of their test concept car. Did 1,000 kilometers on one charge, and then 1,200 kilometers and a single charge, which is like 600, 700 miles each time. And what they realized, instead of having a bunch of different modules, which allows you to like, oh, this whole module has gone bad, let's drop the battery, let's pull this module out, let's put this on module. They sort of just got rid of all the modules. So the battery pack is one giant module. So it reduced weight, it reduced complexity, because they realized, and I think Nissan with the Leaf and some other vehicles, and the first generation Leaf, they weren't water cooled, they were air cooled, and so they sort of their degradation, and then it's 10 years ago. But they're realizing that degradation isn't nearly as bad as they anticipated, which is good for us. And, it's good for, the automakers, because it makes it look like, they're doing a good job. And many automakers, what they do is they'll tell you, well, it has, let's say 100 kilowatt hour capacity pack, but they only give you 93 kilowatt hours of capacity. So at any time, you're only getting 93 kilowatt hours of capacity. So the other 7 kilowatt hours of capacity, Volkswagen does this, a bunch of automakers, Tesla doesn't do it. They give you the whole pack. They're like, just go crazy. But what they do is that allows them to say, well, as modules or as pouches or as, as cells die, they can replace them with these extra 7 that they've had just sort of sitting there, this other 7 kilowatt hours. So it's a big, like, Volkswagen.
I love that and hate that at the same time.
No.
Because in 10 years, you're like, oh, because you get used to only having this 93 kilowatt hours of capacity for, whatever. And this other 7 kilowatts is just sort of waiting. Like they're the reserve team. They're on the bench. They're ready to go. They're clean. They're fresh. They're wearing the and then they need it. They take off their little pants. They rip apart and they jump on the court. I don't know. I don't know sports.
Yeah. Since we're talking about batteries, I want to ask about lithium, because a lot of the countries are being very tight with their raw materials. They're not necessarily letting them be shipped to different markets. Lithium is the central component of these batteries. It is a huge part of the cost. There's projections of lithium shortages in the next couple of years that are going to keep the price of lithium up. Is there any sense that lithium availability is going to become an issue in the next couple of years for EVs?
Well, it's scary because it's hard to say, well, what's the supply chain like?
Yeah.
I think we've all learned, well, no one can figure that out. I mean, but lithium's there. The crazy thing about lithium is it's everywhere. And with the Inflation Reduction Act, or whatever they're calling it, part of that is, sourcing battery materials from the United States. Well, they're actually looking into the Salton Sea, which has been sort of an environmental disaster. We've sort of just kind of messed that whole place up over the past few decades or 100 years. But using that as a source of lithium. And there's other areas in the country where we can use as a source of lithium. Of course, you have to spin these up. You have to do mining. And of course, there's a lot. Let's say the United States, when it comes to lithium, to mining, we might be a bit more careful about our impact on the environment than, say, China, which has been, sort of the main supplier of not just battery supplies, but also the components that go inside of motors, rare earths, magnets. 90% of that comes from China, and they've shot up the price recently, and they're not happy about the IRA. China's not happy about the Inflation Reduction Act, because they're like, hey, we had this. Why are you taking this away from us? And so, some, BMW, Nissan, they've removed magnets out of their electric motors So there's just one less thing they have to deal with when it comes to sourcing. It's an electrically excited motor instead of having, always having a magnet in there. So it's, is there going to be a lithium supply in the future? Maybe, but when it comes down to it, if there's money to be made, someone's going to figure out a way to get more lithium out of the ground.
We started this with Kishore asking about the state of the market right now in terms of the manufacturers and cars. And you said Hyundai is doing a great job. Obviously, a lot of international companies with existing car lines. But we also said, maybe 1 in every 4 cars in China is an EV. How do you see a lot of those international cars making their way stateside? Is compatibility an issue in terms of infrastructure there, infrastructure here? Or do we see EVs really in the States being dominated most by domestic manufacturers?
Let me put a finer point on it. Am I getting my Tata EV from India anytime soon?
Well, you'll get a Tata EV, but it'll be made by Jaguar. You can get an I-Pace right now. Jaguar, JLR is owned by, Tata. So you can get a Jaguar right now that's an electric. So you can get your Tata EV. There's also a nice Land Rover coming out there's a Land Rover out right now that they're coming out with a hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and an EV version. So if you're very rich, but you also need to go off-road, you can get yourself a really nice new Land Rover. So, for the most part, we're seeing most of the EVs coming from Europe, United States, and Korea. Nissan is sort of the outlier when it comes to Japan. There was a RAV4 that was an EV for a little while, and Honda is bringing something over. But Honda and Toyota and Mazda has something right now, but they've been a little bit slow bringing their EVs out, which isn't necessarily a horrible thing because we still have a long time. It's and they're still Honda and Toyota still make money hand over fist. They're not hurting because there's no Honda electric vehicle in the United States right now. That said, especially with California, it's 2035, no more sales of gas powered vehicles in 2035 or new gas. Right. So you can still buy or used whatever in 2036. They kind of have to get on the ball, and they have been. I mean, Toyota has what is it? The BZ4, the worst name. If it's also Subaru, it's the Subaru Solterra. Let's just call it the Subaru Solterra and be done with it. But they are coming out with EVs, but it's a lot of Europe because Europe has a lot of regulatory issues around EVs. So there's a lot of European EVs coming out. And the United States, I think Ford's done a really good job with the Mach-E and the F-150 Lightning. GM's Ultium platform, those vehicles are finally coming to market. The Hummer EV is just ridiculous. It's a Hummer that happens to be an EV. Everything about that vehicle is bonkers. It makes like 0 sense, but you drive, you're like, ha ha ha, this is fun. The flip side of that is that I've driven the Cadillac Lyriq, which is also based on the Ultium platform, and that's a great vehicle. So everyone's coming and getting up to speed. But I think GM's done a really good job with their Ultium platform. They've taken a little bit more time than I anticipated to get those vehicles to market. But the platform itself is good enough that the first Honda will be built, or the first Honda available in the United States that's an EV in the last 5 years or so, that's new and is going to be built on the Ultium platform. That's the Prologue. So,
Really quick follow-up. You mentioned the F-150 Lightning. F-150 best-selling car in the U.S. How big of a deal is the F-150 Lightning, and how much of its success is going to mean success for EV pickups in the U.S.?
I think first of all, it's like you said, it's the most, the F Series is the best-selling vehicle in the United States for 4 decades, which is, the best-selling vehicle, not the best-selling truck, not the best-selling SUV, vehicle in 4 decades. So making that into an EV was a huge deal. It's especially huge for the Pro model, which is the workman's model, the contractors, the fleet sales, the landscapers. That is sort of a huge deal because most of those people aren't driving. You're working in your town, you're driving maybe 20, 30 miles. You go there, you go back, you plug your car in. You go there, you go back, you plug your car in. And the fact that it has power that comes out of the trunk, and you have this giant frunk, like everything about those vehicles is amazing for those folks. When you come into the consumer thing, I mean, the F-150, it's a big seller. It's a luxury vehicle with a bed. That's how people are buying these things. They're spending so much money on these pickups that people don't really realize. You're like, oh, that truck's, the other day I was behind an F-250 Super Duty that was a dually, that was a platinum. And I told my wife, I'm like, that truck's probably about $150,000. She's like, what? I'm like, no, yeah. So the F series for Ford is just printing money.
It's a cultural thing. It's a cultural thing. And can be big business in aftermarket accessories to take use of that electricity.
Everything and everything that you have for your F-150 that's gas powered just bolts right on top of your electric version. So if you have, a cage for, all your stuff, you just take it off your gas powered one, throw it in your electric one, boom, you're ready to go. Like everything. If you get in the truck, it's, without knowing it's an electric truck, without driving it, you would think, oh, this must be the gas version. Nope. So it's a huge deal. And I think it was really smart of Ford to do that, because if they can get that up to scale, that's going to, bring their prices down. That's going to get them, and the fact that they're going to scale quicker than other OEMs, traditional OEMs, means that they're going to have like the first pick when it comes to supply issues.
And instant torque, pickup with real pickup.
It is the best F-150, hands down. I've driven the regular F-150. I drove this. I'm like, it's just the best one. It drives better. It's all-wheel drive. It's just it's quieter. It's smoother. Everything about it is like, this is the best pickup truck.
You can feel the pickup in your pickup.
You can pick. Yes, exactly.
Last one for me. I have to ask the selfish question. I'm in the market for an EV right now. What's your favorite that is out there and available right now?
Ioniq 5, the Hyundai Ioniq 5.
Really? Pixel car?
The Pixel car. It first of all, it like speaks to me as a Gen Xer because it looks like a 90s hatchback. Plus, it has the pixels, so there's that. So you have the gaming, the 16-bit gaming lifestyle that I lived as a child, or the 8-bit, because I'm actually that old. It drives really well. There's a ton of room. It's very comfortable. It's super efficient. It charges really quickly. Like everything about it is like, that's the EV that people want. Now, I recently drove the ID Buzz, the Volkswagen bus, the microbus. That thing is great because it's exactly what it needs to be. It's not, particularly fast. It still has EV torque, but it's not, it's way faster than the original bus. But the fact that I was driving it around, and I drove the short wheelbase, which we're not getting, so we're getting a longer wheelbase. And the whole thing I was thinking about was like, we can put the dogs back here, we can go camping, like all the things you can do with a bus or with a van that for some reason for years people have sort of poo-pooed van. Vans are awesome, by the way. So everything you can do with a cool van, you can do that with the ID Buzz, and you're doing it with fewer, impact on the environment.
But one quick follow-up to wrap up. Like right now, if you try to go buy an EV, most of the cars that we've mentioned come with markups. Some of them are still really insane. Those markups are coming down, but they're still really high. So I think I was quoted an EV6 markup of $5,000 just for the markup, or some people are taking the federal tax credit as the markup, as like the $7,500. Do you see that persisting in the short term?
In the short term, definitely, but there is a site that I want to tell everyone about. It's called markups.org. And you can look on that site and you can find vehicles. You can see the markups that they have. For example, there is according to markups.org, there is a dealership in Palm Springs that has Hyundai Ioniq 5s without markups.
Wow.
You have to go to Palm Springs, which is fine. It's nice. It's warm. There's, I guess, golf. And, but you can use it. You can see the markups of dealerships in your area. Yeah. And I tell people this right now, if you don't have to buy a car right now, don't. Okay. It's very difficult. You're going to be waiting. You're probably going to get ripped off with the markups. There's a lot of things sort of working against people who are trying to buy right now. And dealers don't have much inventory. So they're trying to make the money some other place. And they know there's only, it's supply and demand. But yeah, markups.org. Check it out. I wrote an article about just buying cars right now. One of them, I talked about markups.org, and I said, there's probably dealers who are going in and trying to like mess with it. And I got a message from one of the co-founders like, no, we got things in there to stop that. So
nice.
So
nice.
yeah, so if you're looking for a vehicle and you absolutely positively have to buy one right now, check that out. And they'll probably help you save hopefully a few bucks. I was in the market. I was looking at the new Subaru BRZ or GR86. It's a $30,000 rear-wheel drive manual transmission sports car. The markup in the Bay Area, two places. One was $15,000. The other one was $13,000 for a $30,000 car. I'm just like, nope.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, thank you so much, Robbie, for jumping on the podcast and answering a few of our questions about EVs. If people are interested, want to hear more, they can always ping you. We'll have your links to your places where people can find you in the show notes and description of the video. And you also co-host an EV podcast called the Wheel Bearings Podcast. That's wheelbearings.media, I believe, is the website, or I guess you can find it wherever you download your podcasts. Robbie, so good to see you. And
yeah, it was great to see you. It was great talking to you. I really like talking about cars now, and especially EVs, because I think it's an important, so it's an exciting transformation. I mean, the thing I tell people is like, well, I don't know. I'm like, just get behind the wheel and drive one, because once you drive it, then that's it. You're hooked. They're like, oh, wait, this is so much. It drives so much. There's all these things that, especially the average driver, everything that you want from a car is there in an EV.
Totally. You're not making the compromises anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I thought that was super interesting. I'm not going to buy the durian of EVs, Kishore. I after listening to that, hopefully you won't either. But
I honestly don't think I'm going to buy an EV after that conversation in the short term, because it feels like we're in this kind of fever moment right now, and there's probably value in waiting a little bit for some of those things to settle out.
Yeah, I think for me, it's less so the maturity of the technology and more so the market forces right now and where the economy's at and demand than the tech. I'm confident in the tech, but wait till it settles down a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that does it for this week's show. We do have an outro. Before we do the outro, what's been on the site this week? We have some new one-day builds. Some fun show and tells. I can tease next week. Adam reviews Phil Tippett just announced a new book about Tippett Studio. It's the art book of all of Phil Tippett's work, and we got a chance to do an early look at that, as well as it was Phil Tippett's birthday this past week. So happy birthday to our friend Phil over at Tippett Studio. And here we go. This outro. Anything else, Kishore? You want to shout out? Nope. All right. Here we go. This outro is from Great Job. And
Blast from the Past. Great job.
Blast from the Past. Great job. And I have not listened to it yet.
That always ends well for us.
Hi there. I didn't see you.
Let's talk about products first. Well, Magic Trackpad.
Okay.
Magic Trackpad.
It looks like it's as big as a keyboard.
Everyone says it is Apple says 80% bigger than the trackpad on your MacBook Pro. So using Pythagoras, I think from a diagonal perspective, you're not going to get twice
just
diagonal.
Invoke the Pythagorean theorem? Is that what just happened there?
I'm trying to do some math here. And if you're talking about area is doubled, then it is the multiplier for the diagonal length. It's 4.7 inches tall.
Yes, and it's the same aspect ratio as the traditional trackpad.
So use that with math, and you can extrapolate how big this thing is. The point is, it's bigger than the trackpad right now. It has the same angle incline.
The short version is it looks fucking huge.
Kishore, that was from episode 21 of this podcast.
Yeah, and it proves the larger point that we should never be allowed to do math live on podcasts.
Absolutely not. No snacking on snacks. No doing math on a podcast unless you are a math podcast. There you go. Episode 666 in the bag. See you next week. Bye.